So I had a question the other day. Can I replace the voice in the skull with music? So instead of talking to myself all the time, I hear music. And obviously, it's possible because some people claim that that's exactly what happens to them. So, yes, absolutely, you can do this. And it's far more pleasant to have music in the background rather than continuously talking to yourself. But what I want to talk about in this video is all the other things you can do to replace that voice in the head. And what you're doing here is you're just giving the mind program something to do. So remember, the mind program is a biological system. So it's part of the body and it's part of our survival. So 20,000 years ago, you would ask, how am I going to eat today? How do I not get eaten? How do I not freeze to death? Today, you might have the question, well, what am I going to have for lunch? And that's a really different question. And so the problem is that we have this very effective program running around in our skull, but it just doesn't have anything to do. And this is why we come up with all these things like fidget spinners. If you remember, that was real popular a couple of years ago. But now there's all kinds of new toys like this, just like bubble wrap, where you're giving the hands something to do. And so these toys are probably a good thing. And there's a lot of different versions of them. We have that expression, idle hands are the devil's workshop. And there probably is something to that because the first mechanism that the mind started to work through actually was the hands. The hands were how we manipulated the world, particularly the right hand. That's why most of us are right handed because the left brain does all the thinking. And it's the one that wants to manipulate and control the world around us. So if you can give the hand something to do, it takes the puzzle, the problem from the thinking mind. And so that's why we actually have the word grasp is basically just a different word for understanding. So if you understand something, it is to grasp it. That's because they're basically the same thing. So for some of us, we think, well, I'm going to watch TV to get my mind off of these troubles. And for some people, that actually does work. But for some of us, the problem with the mind is its physicality. So simply watching TV isn't going to be enough. You need to do keep the hands occupied. So if I'm watching TV, I'll actually practice scales on the guitar. That's one thing you can do. But of course, there's knitting. I mean, people knit, and there's a wonderful story Ram Dass used to tell when he was lecturing on cosmic consciousness and so the effects of LSD. And there was this person in the audience, and she just didn't seem to fit. She didn't look like the other hippies at the time. And so he had to talk to her. And after the talk, he approached her and he asked her, he's like, do you get all this stuff with cosmic consciousness? And she just said, yeah, absolutely. And he's like, well, what led you to this? And she goes, oh, well, I knit. And so her knitting had led her to the same cosmic consciousness that Ram Dass had arrived at through very different means. And it's all by just giving the mind something to do. So this is just a real practical piece of advice. Think of the mind as this little kid. It just, wants something to do today. What are you going to do to occupy the mind? What are you going to do to give it kind of today's project? And so sometimes it could be just sitting practicing scales. Sometimes it could be knitting. Sometimes it can be music. If you listen to enough music, the mind will gravitate towards that and be busy playing that some song in the back of the mind rather than worrying about the future.